um, for recording.
Okay. Hey you guys, my name's Cayla. You can find me on Instagram if you'd like at the_sober_therapist. But I just kind of wanted to share with you guys a little bit about my story and what I've gone through and what's brought me to where I am today. So I want to start off with a poem that I wrote early last year that I really feel like encompasses what addiction was for me. I am an addict. I am addicted to the numbing of the mind, to the fading away of the people and the noise around me. I crave the ecstasy that is my thoughts, my feelings, my life as they fade into an afterthought. I am an addict. Not in the belligerent, obsessive form of the word that forces one to lust after their next fixed, but rather I am enslaved to the escape from reality, to a detached outlook on life. I have given pieces of myself to people without even the faintest of memory. I have used words as weapons and wounded those I love. I have risked the very safety and life's blood of those around me in order to reach a mere destination. I have lost myself. I give myself over to these habits again and again. For what? To fit in with those around me, to participate with people in my life, to feel accepted. Since when is the honorable, healthy, healing approach to life frowned upon? All that I have gained from these endeavors is an abounding sense of guilt, shame, and embarrassment. So, where does this take me? I am an addict. I am recovering. I am living life day to day, taking each moment as it comes my way. So, I wrote that early last year around my first attempt at sobriety. And I didn't destroy my life in addiction. I was going to school, I worked 2 jobs, I maintained friendships. But on the surface, what looked like a hardworking, strong, independent woman was really an empty shell looking for any way to be fulfilled. I had a relatively happy childhood, but I had been searching my whole life for that magic something to make everything better, to make my world make sense. For a long time, I searched for my meaning and for my purpose in men. Growing up, I jumped from one relationship to another, grasping at any attempt to establish connection and feel loved. When ultimately I didn't find that missing piece, I'd cut my losses. I was a storm moving on from one to the next, not caring who I hurt in my wake. When I got to college, I tried alcohol for the first time, and it wasn't some magical aha moment where I found what I'd been missing. But what alcohol did start to give me was connection. I gained friendships, memories, and most importantly, in my little world at that time, attention from men. For years, drinking to have fun was enough. What I didn't know, what someone actually pointed out to me a few years ago, was that blacking out is not a normal part of drinking. I sincerely, wholeheartedly thought that everyone blacked out when they drank. When people would say they were buzzed, I thought that that meant when you were unable to see straight. I had a very skewed sense of what I thought was normal and what was abnormal. But despite this alarming discovery, I continued down my path because I was content. I was content to forget my nights, forget my troubles, and forget my feelings. Alcohol gave me the ability to simultaneously make what I thought at the time was true connection with others and disconnection from my own reality. For as long as I can remember, I've struggled with emotions. I have trouble expressing emotions, but also feeling them and putting them into words. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a sociopath. I'm actually very empathetic and I can take on the feelings and emotions of others. But when I come to myself, I was like a brick wall. I had everything locked away tight and no one needed to get in. What I didn't realize was that I was not only keeping others at arm's length, but I was keeping myself at arm's length. For months, I had this internal battle raging. I sat between knowing that I had to give up drinking and thinking to myself that I couldn't possibly be an addict. I was working 2 jobs, getting my master's degree in a healthy relationship. I was lying to myself, hiding behind my mask because I wasn't ready to let go of my escape. I didn't know how to cope with my feelings. I didn't know how to handle stress, disappointment, and hardship without alcohol. I had associated alcohol with not only all of the lows, but with all of my highs. I drank to numb the bad days and to celebrate the good days, which ultimately led to me having a reason to drink on most days. There was always an excuse I could give myself on why I couldn't give up alcohol just yet. So and so's birthday's next week. Oh, then the 4th of July. And then I have a bachelorette party. I'll think about giving up alcohol once I get through all of that. But the thing is there's always going to be one more celebration, one more party, one more holiday. As addicts, we give ourselves every excuse in the book to drink. We become master manipulators of our own realities, and we become good at fooling even ourselves. Early last year, I had my first attempt at sobriety. I poured my bottles down the drain and told people I was taking a break. I wasn't quite ready to say that I was done drinking forever. And because I wasn't able to admit that to others, I left the door cracked for my addiction. And sure enough, just shy of 2 months sober, that sneaky little voice crept back in and told me, "You can have just one." I feel like this is such a common phrase that we tell ourselves. You can have just one, you can control it, you can drink normally. And I let that voice pull me in, and I went right back to where I had been 2 months earlier, drinking to numb the pain and to celebrate the good. It was easy to sink right back into old patterns because society says that alcohol is positive. Alcohol is something we should indulge in. Did you know that alcohol is just ethanol? Ethanol is what we use to fuel our cars. Gasoline and drinking alcohol are chemically the same substance, and we put that into our bodies and we're told it's good for us. It's interesting when you find the articles that say some part of drinking is good for you. When you look at into who funds those articles, you know what you find? Big alcohol. They want us to convince ourselves that one glass of wine is good for your heart. They don't want us to know that more people in America die from alcohol related causes than any other drug. They don't want us to get in on all of the reasons alcohol is poisoning us because they profit from our use, our addiction, and our sickness. It's hard to look back on those couple of months that I lost by giving back into my addiction. But ultimately, I'm really thankful. Those 2 months of sobriety convinced my boyfriend to go completely sober, and he just celebrated 500 days. It took me a while to come back into my sobriety, but falling back into my old patterns of use got me to where I am now. I know there's no looking back for me. I know that living life sober is the only way for me. I may not have destroyed my life, but if I had continued down the path I was on, I am fully convinced that I would have lost everything. In sobriety, I have found the true meaning of connection. I have allowed myself to feel and experience emotions, and it's freaking hard, but it's also beautiful and real and raw. And I'm no longer numbly coasting through life going through the motions, but I'm consciously experiencing each and every moment instead of experiencing those events from a fuzzy, blurred perspective. I'm now fully present with the people I love, and I am creating memories that I will carry with me through the rest of my life. I wouldn't trade what I have gone through for anything. My addiction helped me to discover my passion for others hurting and to be a voice for those struggling with addiction. Through my addiction, I have found a sense of purpose and a sense of belonging in the world that I don't need a man or alcohol to fill. Working where I do now in an inpatient substance abuse clinic as a therapist, I have learned so much about addiction and recovery that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. Most interesting to me is learning about the neuroscience behind addiction. There's this great talk by Complex Care that talks about our bodies and its relation to dopamine. So, dopamine is the chemical responsible for motivation and our ability to feel pleasure. Our bodies need dopamine in order to survive. And on a normal day, your body naturally produces 50 nanograms per deciliter of dopamine. 50 nanograms per deciliter is essentially what you need to get out of bed, go to work, and get shit done. On our best days, best day of your life, our bodies can naturally reach 100 grams per deciliter of dopamine. Our favorite foods release about 96 nanograms per deciliter of dopamine, and sex produces about 92 nanograms per deciliter. On our very worst days, the days where we can't get out of bed, our bodies lie naturally around 40 nanograms per deciliter. When we introduce substances into our bodies, the rush of dopamine that our bodies receives is unnatural and therefore naturally unattainable. Substances like marijuana, alcohol, and heroin release levels of dopamine into the high hundreds. Meth hits the ceiling, bringing in 1,100 nanograms per deciliters of dopamine. And that's more than 10 times what our body can naturally produce on the very best days of our lives. Everything else in our life begins to pale in comparison to the high that we receive from our substance because our bodies become naturally accustomed to these abnormal levels of dopamine. And when we strip those substances away, our bodies struggle to naturally produce dopamine, and then we hit an all-time low, sometimes leveling as low as 10 nanograms per deciliter. Early sobriety is hard mentally, physically, and spiritual for everyone. But people often feel that it's impossible to get through life, and that's because chemically it almost is impossible. Our bodies are functioning at an extremely scarily low level of dopamine, which makes getting out of bed excruciating, let alone seeing a doctor, going to meetings, and seeing a therapist. I think it's important for those in early recovery to know that how they're feeling is normal. It's normal to feel like you're dying and that you can't push through. But guess what? You can. You're going to start feeling more normal as your body begins to regulate. That doesn't mean that every day is going to be rainbows and butterflies, but it does mean that you'll begin to be able to function at a normal level again. There are going to be hard days, but those hard days are what make the great days so much better. It takes our brains up to 2 years to fully heal from the damage that substances can do. 2 years. That's a long ass time. We have to remember that we are healing. Years of damage can't be undone in one day, 1 week, or even 1 year. We have to approach ourselves with grace and self compassion, allowing ourselves to have those bad days, but reminding ourselves that it's going to be okay. We're going to be able to get through it, and there are better days lying ahead. I'm over 3 months into my sobriety, and I still have hard days, but my life has reached a point where I know there's no turning back. There's no going back for me because I know how low I was. I know what brought me to where I am. And while sometimes it's hard to look back on that side of me, I'm so grateful that it brought me here. And I'm so grateful for the connections that I have made and for the work that I'm doing now. I wouldn't trade my journey for anything. So I want to thank you guys for listening to a little bit of my story and what I had to share. If you want to reach out just to follow my journey, or you want to reach out and have questions or talk, I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to answer any questions that I can or point you in any direction that I can share. So look me up again. My name's Cayla Lowe. You can find me on Instagram at the_sober_therapist. I look forward to hearing from you, and thanks for letting me share a little bit of myself.